CEO of the Martinsburg-Berkeley County Chamber of Commerce, and we want to welcome you all to the 2024 Eastern Panhandle Economic Outlook. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Jim Linsenmeyer with the West Virginia Development Office, Jennifer Smith with the Berkeley County Development Authority, Heather McIntyre with the Jefferson Chamber of Commerce, and Eddie Benitez with the Jefferson County Development Authority for partnering with us on this annual event. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, John Deskins. John Deskins serves as the Director of the Bureau of Business and Economic Research and as Associate Professor of Economics in the College of Business and Economics at West Virginia University. He leads the Bureau's efforts to serve the state by providing rigorous economic analysis and macroeconomic forecasting to business leaders and policymakers from across the state. He received his Ph.D. in economics at the University of Tennessee. Deskins Academy research has focused on economic development, small business economics, and government tax and expenditure policy, primarily at the U.S. state level. His work has appeared in outlets such as Contemporary Economic Policy, Public Finance Review, Economic Development Quarterly, Small Business Economics, Public Budgeting and Finance, Regional Studies, Annals of Regional Science, Tax Notes and State Tax Notes, as well as in books published by Cambridge University Press and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Deskins has testified before the United States Senate, the United States House of Representatives, and the West Virginia Legislature. He has delivered more than 300 speeches to business, government, and community groups, and his quotes have appeared in numerous media outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Bloomberg, CNBC, National Public Radio, and PBS. He has served as principal investigator or co-principal investigator on more than $2 million in funded research. Please join me in welcoming John Deskins.
All right, you all know that I love coming over here to visit you folks in the Eastern Panhandle. I like it because you're always very friendly, very hospitable, very fun to hang around with. And also, this talk is the easiest one to give. Sometimes when I give speeches in parts of the state that really face a lot of challenges, the talks are harder because it's hard to deliver bad news. But here, Berkeley County and Jefferson County are literally off the charts compared to West Virginia in terms of every single statistic. So it's pretty easy, and it's happy. It's a good occasion. All we have to do over here is think about how to keep this momentum going and how to accelerate this momentum, and that's a lot easier discussion to have than a discussion of turning negative momentum into positive momentum. So anyway, I like coming here. I'm sure you all have heard WVU's in the midst of a budget crisis. It's rough in many ways, and so there is no way that I can print my materials. The bosses we've gotten all these speeches about you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't print. So just the easiest way to do it is just to Google the WVU Bureau of Business and Economic Research, and you can go there and get the full Economic Outlook report. Because I don't have anything printed to give you. Although I will say the report that I post online was posted in late September, and the numbers have improved noticeably even since late September. So even already that report is a little bit out of date. I'm going to try not to knock your microphone down, but this is like right in my face. And we have one mic taped to the other one here, so I'm worried it's going to create a catastrophe. Here's the overall outlook, or here's the kind of the key takeaways before I really get into it. We still face uncertainty nationally, and that uncertainty at the very least has the potential to cause slow growth. A year ago, or even 6 months ago, or even early fall, the uncertainty that we faced nationally was much more significant, and there was a pretty high probability of a recession. However, the numbers have looked really good the last few months, and that probability of a recession has fallen quite a bit. But because of the uncertainty that we face nationally and the headwinds, we do think growth is going to be slow in the nation and in the state over the coming 5 years. Now, if you'd asked me a year ago or 6 months ago, I would have said there's a really good chance we're going to face a recession. That seems to be behind us now, and now our concern is, the likelihood of slow growth. But slow growth is a heck of a lot better than a recession, of course, either in the state or in the nation. So, I'll talk about the challenges that we face in West Virginia and the far fewer challenges that we face here in the Eastern Panhandle. I'll talk about the opportunities that we face. And I will mention, too, we have a lot of successes in West Virginia. This is one of the key areas where we experience those successes. But there's this real kind of divergence. When you hear good news being shared in an anecdotal sense, the good news doesn't seem to match with overall broad statewide numbers. And the reason is the successes that we have are just far, far, far too concentrated geographically. So one of the key points that I'll talk about is work that we need to do to spread that growth out, to spread that prosperity out across more of our counties. That'll be a key point. That'll be my last key point to address. So, of course, I was asked to come here to talk about the state and the local economy, but I do want to just spend a couple minutes going over the national situation because it is important, and any headwinds that we face nationally certainly impact us in West Virginia and here in Jefferson and Berkeley County. So just give me just a minute to go through the national situation. The big concern, the big thing that we've all been talking about the last 2 or 3 years now has, of course, been inflation. There's kind of the two key inflation metrics that the Federal Reserve follows. I don't have that much history in this figure, but if you were to take this back, the inflation that we saw in the summer of 2022, it's been a year and a half now since peak, but the inflation that we saw in the summer of 2022 was the highest inflation that we had seen in 40 years. You'd have to go back to the early 1980s to see inflation that was as bad as what we were seeing in the summer of 2022. So you see how much inflation's come down. The situation looks far, far, far better than it did, at any point over the last year and a half. But the point I want to emphasize is we're not quite out of the woods yet. You see, I've got that dotted line there. That's the Federal Reserve's target. The Fed wants to get us to smooth and steady 2% inflation. And right now, the latest reading as of yesterday, inflation's still 2.9% by the specific measure that the Fed looks at. If you look in the newspaper, there's about 4 different measures that you see, but if you look at the specific measure the Fed uses, we're still 2.5%. So we're still almost 1.5 times as high as what the Fed wants us to be. So things are looking better. Things are looking a lot better than they have been. We're not worried about this massive recession that may come, but we still have a ways to go. We still have uncertainty that's going to be with us for at least the first half of this year until inflation gets down finally to the Fed's target. The forecast that I'm showing you here is from S&P Global, and they expect that inflation is not going to reach target until the middle of this year. So 5 or 6 months yet to go before we can say we're finished with this whole process. That's what we think right now. I don't want to give you too much of a history lesson because you all are worried about where we're going, but I'll just talk for a second about what's happened and why we've seen this battle with inflation and why we've taken the actions that we have. When inflation first started to pop up, you see there, inflation was first starting to pop up in 2021. It reached its worst in 2022. When that happened, we really had this combination of 4 different factors that all came together to give us this 40-year high in the rate of inflation. We had high energy prices at the time. Obviously, gas prices have improved a lot since then. But if you look back at the time, energy prices were a lot higher. That's an important contributor to inflation nationally, kind of across the board. At the same time, we had all these supply chain constraints that were with us coming out of COVID. Obviously, if goods are in short supply, economics 101, the price will go up. On top of that, we had these massive workforce shortages across the country. Several million people left the workforce during COVID above and beyond what we would normally see. So if businesses have a harder time getting the workers that they need, then they have to pay more to attract those workers. Those higher wages are passed on in the form of higher prices. That's a third source of inflationary pressure. All three of these are supply side factors, you might say, that all contribute to inflation. And on top of that, coming out of COVID, we had very strong demand. Part of this was engineered by the Federal Reserve. Part of this was engineered by the federal government, but very strong demand as well coming out of COVID. So we have three supply side factors that are all contributing to inflation. We have one demand side factor that's contributing to inflation. Put the four together, and the result is 40-year high in the rate of inflation. But the thing that some people may not realize is even when those original catalysts disappear, even when those problems are fixed or they just fade away on their own, inflation can become self-perpetuating if we don't act. Once it starts, inflation can just feed on itself and it can just fuel itself if we don't take action to prevent that from happening. So that's kind of the concern that we faced. Even after those problems disappeared, we were worried about inflation becoming self-perpetuating. So of course, the result has been higher interest rates. This is a tool that the Fed uses to combat this high rate of inflation. The Fed basically works to drive up interest rates in the economy, pushing down overall demand and essentially choking inflation out of the economy. The blue line is the key rate that the Federal Reserve targets. I'm sure y'all have all heard about that in the news. But the degree to which the Fed raised interest rates over the last 2 years was the most aggressive ever. They have never raised interest rates as aggressively as what we've seen over the last 2 years. The key part of the story is the last time the Fed did this with this level of aggressiveness, the Fed's done this before multiple times in the past 3 or 4 decades, but the last time the Fed raised rates this aggressively, which was in response to that early 80s inflation that I just mentioned, the result was a massive recession. Go back to the early 80s, we had similar story. We had very high inflation. The Fed responded with a very aggressive campaign of raising interest rates, and the result was the 82-83 recession, which was one of the worst that we've seen since World War II, since the Great Depression. That's the uncertainty that I've been talking about. This exact same thing was happening again, in a general sense. Last time the result was a massive recession. That's why we've been so fearful about another massive recession. But it seems like this time, the economy is different structurally in a lot of important ways. I could literally talk all day about the ways in which the economy is different now that's making this unfold in a more attractive way. But bottom line is the Fed's been able to do a really good job, it seems, of raising interest rates just enough, just exactly the right speed and the right magnitude to push down inflation, to get rid of that inflation, but not too much to push us into another recession. So the Fed's really been able to strike that balance to engineer this soft landing that's achieving both goals, getting inflation out of the economy and avoiding a recession. Fed's done a much better job, it seems, so far compared to historic episodes. Again, if you heard me talk 6 months ago, my talk would be much less optimistic. It would be much more, it wouldn't necessarily be negative, but it would be fearful. It would be nervous about the possibility of a recession. But now the data have come in really good to point to this soft landing, to this kind of threading the needle, making sure that this was working out just exactly right. But that said, we still find ourselves with much, much, much higher interest rates. And the Fed is not going, there is a Federal Reserve meeting today, so I guess I could say something and then I could, have egg on my face this afternoon when the Fed news comes out. But my take, and I'm pretty confident in this, the Fed's going to be very cautious before they start lowering interest rates back, because the Fed wants to make absolutely sure that we're done with this inflation. We've choked inflation out of the economy. We've gotten back to that long-term target of 2% inflation. The Fed's going to make sure that we've achieved that goal before this Fed starts kind of letting off and starting letting interest rates go back down. So we don't expect an interest rate decrease today. We don't expect an interest rate decrease, until much later this year, in an optimistic sense. On top of all this, we haven't even felt all the downward pressure from the interest rate increases that we've seen so far. When interest rates rise, that doesn't affect the economy fully for 9 months or a year until after the fact. So all the downward pressure that we are going to feel from those interest rate increases, we haven't felt that yet. So that's the headwinds that I'm talking about. The lingering headwinds associated with these high interest rates, that's what's a key driver of the national and the state forecast going forward. This, just to give you a little context, this is the national forecast. Again, this isn't my forecast. I don't do national forecasting. This is from S&P Global. And as you can see, no recession is expected. No job loss is expected. That's good. That's a lot better than what we were expecting 6 months or a year ago. But for the most part, it's a relatively flat forecast. You may not be able to completely grasp the nature of that growth given the scale that I have, but we're only expecting about 2 million jobs added over the next 5 years, and that only represents about 1.5% cumulative job growth over the period. And that's because of these headwinds that are still with us and are going to be with us for a while because of these high interest rates. Here's the GDP figure. As you see, the gray part, the forecast part, we don't expect a recession. It's not going into negative territory in any part there, but we do expect GDP growth. It's going to be below normal over the forecast period. So keep that in mind as you think about the rest of my talk, which is going to focus on West Virginia. This is what the national outlook looks like. It's glass half full, it's glass half empty. It's growth, but it's relatively slow growth. I will say, though, the forecast has actually improved quite a bit even over the last 4 months or so, so maybe that'll continue to happen. Maybe optimism will continue to grow, but that's where it stands for right now. So to get to what we really care about, to get to West Virginia, here's the overall jobs number for our state, and there's the national number just for comparison purposes in yellow. So we haven't quite gotten back to our pre-COVID level of employment. If you look back to how many jobs we had in January of 2020, we're not quite back there yet. If you heard me speak about a year ago or so, I thought we were back. I thought we had attained that pre-COVID level of employment, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics really did a kind of a heavy data revision this past summer. And it's not surprising that there were a lot of changes because the last few years have been pretty turbulent, and the new data that are revised and that are more sound indicate we haven't quite fully recovered. Overall, in a state with over 700,000 jobs, we're about 2,400 jobs shy of where we were in January 2020. That amounts to about 0.4%. So we don't have far to go, but we still haven't quite gotten back there. Now, I will say the data I'm showing you here is private sector employment. If you look at total employment, which obviously includes government, the situation's a little bit worse. Government jobs have been slower to come back than private sector jobs. So when I say we're 0.4% down compared to January 2020, it's a little bit worse if you look at the public sector, or if you look at total employment, which incorporates the public sector as well. Here's the same data, but I've just reconstructed those data to present them in an indexed form so you can make a real clean comparison between the state and the nation. You can see how over the first year and a half of COVID or so, the state looked almost identical to the nation in terms of job loss and in terms of that early recovery. But we have lagged the nation over the last couple of years or so. As you see, we stand at 99.4% of where we were in January 2020. Like I just said, the nation is up to 103.7%. So the nation has fully recovered and added another 3.7% in terms of jobs. So, the nation has outperformed us. That's a bummer. That's not good news, but that's what the data show right now. Here's the unemployment situation. What a roller coaster that figure is. As you know, about a year or a year and a half ago, West Virginia achieved lowest unemployment rate that we've ever seen. Unemployment skyrocketed up to about 16% during COVID, but the recovery in the unemployment rate as it's measured was very, very, very fast, very healthy recovery. About a year and a half ago, we got down to well below 4%, down to about 3.6% unemployment, which was the lowest rate we've ever seen. Most of that recovery in the unemployment rate was for the reason that you would expect. Most of the reason was due to people who had lost jobs and they went out and found new jobs. That's what mostly that was about. But some of the recovery was about labor force attrition. Many of you have probably heard me say this before, but to be considered unemployed in these data, you have to be actively looking for work. But if you look across the nation over this period, a lot of people gave up looking for work and they decided to be a stay-at-home parent, or they decided to retire early, or they decided to go back to school for a master's degree or something like that. And when those people quit looking for work and decide to go in a different direction, they're no longer counted as unemployed, and that actually helps lower the measured unemployment rate, even though the person didn't find a job. So this is mostly legit. We do have a very strong labor market right now. I completely believe that. But it's a little bit distorted because of that labor force attrition. And I'm not really talking about the forecast yet, but I'll just kind of give you a preview of where I'm going. We do think the unemployment rate will rise over the next couple years. We think it'll settle back at about 5%. But we think that's going to happen not because of job loss. I just showed you. Actually, I didn't show you, but I'll show you in a minute. But we think jobs are going to grow, but we think the unemployment rate will rise back to that 5% level because we think more people are going to come back into the labor force looking for work, and that'll be a good thing. So even though unemployment is going to get back to what you might call that normal 5% rate, it'll be a good thing, not a bad thing. Unemployment has already risen up a couple of tenths of a percentage point in our state over the past couple months, but that's as we expect. Some of you who've heard me speak before might be tired of hearing me talk about this because I don't ever go anywhere without talking about labor force participation. I think this is the biggest challenge that we face in West Virginia. So this captures the share of the adult population that wants to work. Doesn't matter whether they're working or whether they're just looking for a job. Captures the share of the adult population that wants to work. As you see, there's the national rate. West Virginia comes in dead last among the states at just 55%. So the problem in West Virginia isn't that we have people looking for work and they can't find jobs. That's what the unemployment rate captures. That's not the problem. The problem is we just don't have people looking for work in the first place. I think this is our biggest economic development challenge. I don't think we're ever going to get to the levels of prosperity that we hope for unless we can get more of our people in the workforce, unless we can get that blue bar to move to the right. That's why I keep talking about this. I talk about it in every speech. My hope at this point is, so I'm 45 now. If I work kind of the normal age, I've got 20 more years to go before I retire. So my hope is that we are at the yellow bar. I hope that the blue bar and the yellow bar are right next to each other by the time I retire. We'll see what happens. A lot of people look at this and they say, oh, this is a little bit misleading because West Virginia is an older state. We have a lot of people who are over 65, and so that naturally reduces labor force participation just simply because of age distribution. And that is true. It is absolutely true that we're an older state, and that is one important contributing factor to this labor force participation deficit. But frankly, I don't like it when people say that, because even if you look at prime working age, you can get data that just restrict this to ages 25 to 55, which is what we call prime working age. West Virginia is we're still 50th among the states in terms of labor force participation just for prime working age. So it's the fact that we're older matters, but the problem is much deeper than simply being an older state. Even prime working age labor force participation, we're dead last in the country. You can look at every bracket. You can look at labor force participation for 16 to 25. You can look at it for 25 to 55. You can look at it for 55 to 65. You can slice and dice the data in multiple ways, and in every age bracket, we are at or near the bottom. So the problem is a lot deeper than just age. That's why I keep emphasizing it. Speaking of labor force attrition, I just want to show you really quickly the job openings rate. Talk about these people leaving the workforce. I talk about these workforce shortages and how that contributed to inflation. This is what the job opening situation looks like for our state and for the nation as well. The figure reached a high of over 8%. So that means that out of every 100 jobs that employers wanted to have, 8 of those positions were vacant. And you can see how much of an increase that was since pre-COVID. The situation has improved noticeably over the last 6 months. So these job openings, this problem of labor force shortages isn't as bad as it was, but we're still very much at an elevated level compared to where we were before COVID. And the situation is worse. We're actually quite a bit worse in West Virginia now than we are in the nation in terms of job openings. So the labor force shortages, we think the situation is going to continue to improve as it has, but it's a slow process. It's taken us a long time, it seems, to get back to where we were before COVID in terms of job openings. Per capita personal income, I'll just show you the statistics here. It's not anything surprising. It's a standard old thank God for Mississippi thing, because Mississippi's 50th, we come in at 49th. We're actually quite a ways ahead of Mississippi, though, believe it or not, in terms of these data. And we're just a little bit behind Alabama. If we made just a little bit of improvement, we would actually jump to 48th. We could surpass Alabama, but as it stands right now, we're still at 49th in terms of per capita personal income. This shows you how salaries vary across West Virginia, across industrial supersector. The yellow line in the middle is the overall statewide average. Typical worker in West Virginia makes somewhere in the low 50s, $52,000 or $53,000 a year. But you can see how that average annual salary varies really widely across different parts of our economy. We have utilities and we have mining and gas industry workers who are making well over $100,000, go all the way down to the bottom to leisure and hospitality, where they're just making barely over $20,000. So lots and lots of variation based on industrial composition. I'll just let you digest this just for a second. If you notice the 2023 data, they look quite a bit different. So this shows GDP. GDP captures the total market value of all the stuff that we produce in our economy. It's our key, overall indicator of output. If you look back from 2022 back to 2011, West Virginia underperformed the nation every single year. You had to go back to 2011 to find a year where West Virginia outperformed the nation in terms of GDP growth. Okay? But the data for 2023 show that we made a turnaround. Output growth in West Virginia is actually expected to be not only higher, but quite a bit higher than what we see in the nation. Now, that's not final. Now, the GDP data won't be final until at least the end of March, because GDP data come out with quite a bit of a lag. So we still have a couple months to go before this is final. But as of the most recent expectation, things are looking different. GDP growth was quite a bit higher in our state than it was in the nation for 2023. You have to go back all the way to 2020, all the way back to 2011 to see another year where we outperformed the nation. So that's good news, as long as it holds when the data get revised. But here's kind of the downside of that. This is GDP. I've just indexed it starting at 100 in 2017. And what I have here is I have GDP for what we call the mining supersector. It's mining, but it also includes oil and gas. It's really extraction, any kind of extraction from the earth. So coal and gas is the yellow line, and the blue line is economic output from all the other industrial supersectors in West Virginia except for coal and gas. The bad news is the state has really been flat outside of mining. Now, there are some supersectors that are growing, and there are some that are declining, but the declines are basically washing out the sectors that are growing. The state has been flat overall over about the last 6 years or so. That growth that we've seen has been going gangbusters in coal and gas. So The output growth that we see from energy is good. It benefits the state in many ways. We need to keep that going because it really helps the state in numerous ways. Severance tax collections, for example. But we have to, continue to diversify our economy. We have to get growth in other sectors of the economy to get that blue line to start to look just as strong. There's the coal and gas output figures. That doesn't affect you all as much here in this part of the state, of course, but it does affect the state government financial situation, and it impacts the state in other ways, so it certainly has some implications for you all here in Berkeley and Jefferson County, even though it's not directly being produced here. But gas output has been growing at a healthy pace for over a decade now, almost uninterrupted. We expect that growth to continue. Coal output, what's happened to it over the long term, it suffered a lot during COVID, hasn't quite bounced back to its pre-COVID level of output, but it has bounced back some since COVID, and we expect it to be relatively stable here over the next couple years at least. One issue with coal that a lot of people don't realize is, used to, most of our coal went to electric power generation. And that has fallen tremendously, tremendously, tremendously. In the nation, go back 20 years, over half of our electricity came from coal. Now it's down less than 20%. But after this drop, a lot of the coal that we produce now, a big chunk of the coal that we produce now, is either coal that's going to export. We export coal to Asia. We export coal to Europe. We export coal to South America. We export coal to Africa. We export coal to literally every continent except for Australia and, of course, Antarctica. Export coal, and a lot of the coal that we produce now is metallurgical coal that goes into steel production. So my point is, we're really in a different environment now in terms of coal. We're not selling nearly as much coal into electric power generation. The decline that we see, the collapse that we've seen in that sector is, I wouldn't say it's over with, but it's changed tremendously. And so now we have more stability because we're looking at export markets and metallurgical markets for the coal that we produce now. So that's kind of where the stability comes from. Here's a figure that's pretty daunting for our state. Not so much for these two counties, but for the state overall, this is a pretty daunting figure. The blue bars show you what's happened to the number of people in West Virginia altogether, and then what's happened to the number of people in West Virginia in each age category over the last decade. Clearly, we've been losing people under 25. We've been losing people who are ages 25 to 54. We've been losing people 55 to 65, and we've seen big gains in the number of West Virginians 65 and older. And of course, we've lost population overall, as you see on the far right. The yellow bars show our expectation going forward. You can take it however you want. The bad news is that we're going to continue this trend. We expect to continue to lose younger people. We expect to continue to gain people over age 65. That trend's going to continue. If you want to take this in a positive light, you can say the trend is really decelerating. We're still moving in the wrong direction, but the decline is not happening nearly as quickly as what we've seen over the last decade. So, at least it's good that this trend is slowing down quite a bit over the coming years. I don't have a figure to my next point, but just keep it in mind because it comes in the same context. This is mostly being driven by natural population change. Natural population change is what we call just the difference between births and deaths. West Virginia is shrinking in population because we have more older people, we have fewer younger people, and for about a decade now, we have experienced a situation where deaths outnumber births, okay? That's just kind of the fact for our state. And there's not much we can do about that. There's not a whole lot you can do in the short term to change the birth rates or the death rates, so we're kind of stuck with that. The other part of population change is net migration. How many people move out of the state versus how many people move into the state. The good news is, if you look back 2 years ago, the net migration figure for West Virginia was a positive 1,000. Now, 1,000 is not a lot for a state with 1.7 or 1.8 million, but it was positive. That year, which 2 years ago, we lost about, I forget the numbers right off the top of my head, I should have written this down, but we lost about 12,000 people due to natural population decline. We had 12,000 more deaths than we had births. And so the net migration took the overall population loss figure down to 11,000, right? It wasn't nearly enough to offset the natural population decline, but at least it was positive. At least it was moving in the right direction. If you look at the statistic for last year, the net migration figure moved up to a positive 4,000. The natural population decline number was more like 8,000. The net migration figure was a positive 4,000. So last year we only lost about 4,000 people as opposed to 11 the previous year. Do you see what I'm saying? I should have an illustration here to make this simpler rather than me ramble on through it. But the point is the numbers are moving in the right direction. 2 years is not a super long trend, but at least for now, the migration figures are working in their advantage and they're helping things. That's good, that's important. And obviously, these two counties are two of the key kind of recipients of in-migration. And of course, the birth rates and death rates over here look better as well. But as far as getting people to come to West Virginia in terms of attracting migrants, these two counties are two of the key for that. Diverse regional outcomes across West Virginia. Before I get on to the region, I do want to talk about this issue just really quickly. We do see such a dramatic disparity in terms of the counties that are doing well, the pockets where things are going in the right direction, versus just a large number of counties that are stagnant or some of them just in outright decline. This figure's a little bit bad because it starts at the begin. It goes from the middle of 2012 through the middle of 2022. So the end point makes the figure look a little bit worse than what it might otherwise, but the point still remains. All I did here is I just looked at the growth over that 10-year period, and I just selected the 10 counties that added the most jobs. It wasn't in percentage terms, this was just in terms of raw numbers. Those are the top 10 growth counties. There were a couple more growth counties, but wasn't much more than 10. But anyway, the top 10 growth counties versus everything in white is just the other 45 counties, some of which grew a little bit, others stagnant, others were in decline. The top 10 growth counties over this period added 14,420 jobs, whereas the other 45 counties lost over 58,000 jobs. Now that's a disparate outcome. My point is, I've got 2 points actually. One point is, sometimes you'll hear economic development leaders celebrating good news. Oh, we have this economic development news. We have this economic development good news. We have this economic development news. That's all legit, right? That's all true. It's all legit. It's all good thing that's happening. But when you hear me come and talk, I'll say something like, well, the state's still 2,400 jobs shy of where it was in January 2020. So it seems like we're not on the same page. Do you see what I'm saying? Does my point make sense here? It seems like we're not on the same page. But we're both being honest. We're both telling the truth. But the explanatory factor is the good news just tends to really be concentrated in these few pockets, whereas that good news is sometimes washed out in aggregate data when you have 40 counties or more that are just moving sideways at best. That's why we take different tones sometimes. Another point is kind of the more obvious point. The point is, we have to keep this growth going. This is important. This is driving our state forward. We have to maintain this momentum or accelerate this momentum in these positive growth areas. But we also have to work for ways to get this growth to bleed out, to broaden out to other parts of the state. That's a pretty obvious point there. So this is just the top 10 growth counties. If you look back over the last decade, that's just kind of a picture that depicts every county. Kind of has the same information, but this is showing all counties rather than just the top 10. But there you see the blue counties, the ones that are moving in the right direction. You see the red counties. Clearly we have way too much red, not nearly enough blue. If you look at my forecast going forward, it does look better. There are fewer red counties going forward. There are more blue counties. The white counties are just flat. They're not doing anything, but at least they're not red. But we are moving in the right direction. We are experiencing fewer decline counties. We are experiencing more growth counties, but we just need way more of that. We're not nearly where we need to be in terms of that red to blue ratio, but we are moving in the right direction in terms of broadening that out. Okay? Huh. Why does it say that? So, I use these same talks over and over again, and I just kind of tweak them a little bit depending on where I'm going or the specific audience. And so I'm pretty sure this is the same one I used in December last month to talk to Morgan County, and I'm pretty sure I just had, understanding Morgan County. And when I came in Monday to the office Monday morning, maybe I hadn't had enough coffee, but I meant to change understanding Morgan County to understanding the Eastern Panhandle, but I think I just didn't delete the Morgan County part. I am well aware that Morgan County is part of the Eastern Panhandle. I absolutely love Morgan County. I have a lot of good friends in Morgan County, but I'm blaming that on Monday morning. But anyway, this is for the Eastern Panhandle altogether. And I'm defining the Eastern Panhandle as those three counties. And just for illustrative purposes, here's the number of jobs in each of our three counties. Now, to our Jefferson County people, this is misleading. The data that I'm using here, again, this is Bureau of Labor Statistics data, but this particular data series just captures the number of jobs in the county. Okay? It doesn't capture the number of people in the county who have a job. So almost everywhere, that distinction doesn't matter, right? Very few places in West Virginia does that really matter, but Jefferson County is the one county that's kind of an outlier where there's a lot of people in Jefferson County who live there, enjoy the amenities and the quality of life and the cost of living in Jefferson County, but yeah, they commute out to work elsewhere. So Jefferson County is a lot bigger than that indicates because you have those people who live there but commute outside, but this just captures the jobs that are in the county. So I hope, Heather, I hope that's okay that I present that because, okay, I mean, it's weird because like I say, there's no other part of the state where it really makes any difference. It's just Jefferson County is the one real outlier. So again, every statistic I go through will look better for the Eastern Panhandle, and here's one. You see the decline. Here the blue line is the Eastern Panhandle, the yellow line is the comparison figure. You see the decline that happened in the Eastern Panhandle with COVID. By the time we finished 2022, the Eastern Panhandle had fully recovered, even under the newly revised data. Like I said, even under the better data, Eastern Panhandle had fully recovered. That's a good thing, in contrast to the state in an important way. The only negative thing to point out is 2023 growth was pretty small. The preliminary data that I've looked at so far only indicate about 300 jobs added for the Eastern Panhandle for the last year. But that's okay. We fully recovered from COVID. We have stability. The high interest rates that we see, the headwinds that we see in housing and other parts of the economy because of those headwinds, it's not surprising growth has been slow, but it's been growth. Full recovery and even continued growth, even though it's been slow growth for the last year. Of course, a lot of you look at that and you say, well, okay, it looks good compared to West Virginia, but we're not really in the same area as McDowell County or Mingo County. We need a better comparison. So the better comparison is the Hagerstown MSA. So here's the exact same picture. The Eastern Panhandle picture is identical, but I'm just showing you the Hagerstown MSA employment figure for a different contrast that might be more appropriate. And the same story holds. Eastern Panhandle is still very strong. Hagerstown MSA, you see the decline that it suffered during COVID. You see that it bounced back a little bit, but last year was actually a negative year altogether for the Hagerstown MSA. We have not fully recovered here in the MSA altogether. Even these three counties, Morgan, Jefferson, and Berkeley, not only are they a standout county or standout region compared to the state, they're outperforming just this nearby MSA. They look good in terms of every single statistic I have. Unemployment in the region. This is a little bit out of date. I think this goes back to October of last year. I did not have time to update this to the December number, but it's not going to change hardly any. The point is the labor market is very, very strong here in the Eastern Panhandle. All three counties have a lower unemployment rate than the state, at least as of a couple months ago. Stronger by that metric. Labor force participation, same story. Like I say, this is our biggest challenge in the state. It is something of a challenge in Morgan County. Morgan County does lag the nation in terms of labor force participation, although it does exceed the state. But Jefferson and Berkeley counties, not a problem. I mean, labor force participation looks totally different here compared to the state altogether. Jefferson and Berkeley even exceed the nation and the Hagerstown and the Winchester MSAs in terms of labor force participation. So, looking good on that front as well. Per capita personal income, we do lag a little bit in terms of per capita personal income. Jefferson County is the highest per capita personal income. Jefferson does lag the nation a little bit though, however, but it leads the Winchester MSA, it leads the Hagerstown MSA in terms of per capita personal income. Berkeley comes in a little bit lower. Berkeley does lag Winchester and Hagerstown, but it exceeds the nation altogether. I will say this statistic is a little bit misleading because it's just per capita personal income. In my household, so in my household we have 3 people. My income is what it is. Let's just suppose my income's $100,000. Me, my 2 kids. Their per capita personal income altogether is $33,000 a person, right? When my kids move away, all of a sudden, miraculously, my per capita personal income is going to go from $33,000 to $100,000. You with me? So if you have a young population, it actually kind of screws up this statistic. It's a good thing to have a young population, but just the raw statistic, the way it's calculated, it is screwed up when you have a younger population. I think that's one of the reasons that Berkeley is coming in a little bit lower, is because it's such a young population, and so it looks a little bit lower on a per capita basis. But it's good that you have younger people, more people under 18 who aren't working. On to the forecast. It's a good thing, right? So even that statistic, where it's not as good, I can still explain it in a way that it's good. I mean, it's legit too, though. Here's the forecast. So again, keep in mind we have these headwinds. We're mostly through this battle with inflation. At least 6 months down the road, we think we're going to be through this battle with inflation, but we still have these high interest rates. The Fed's going to be very cautious. The Fed's not going to back off that path for a while. It's going to be until later this year, until the Fed starts cutting interest rates, and it's going to be probably a couple of years before the Fed gets back down to what we consider to be the neutral interest rate. Because of that, slow growth is forecast. We do expect growth to still be relatively strong for this year, for 2024, but then we expect a relatively flat economy for those out years. Again, the situation has improved. It might continue to improve as better economic data come in, but as it stands right now, the forecast calls for relatively flat in 25, 26, 27, but continued growth through this year. There's the sector-by-sector analysis. I'm not going to go through all that. There's a lot of detail there. I won't go through the whole thing, but if you look at the report online, you can kind of get the growth rate that has been experienced and the growth rate that is expected for each of those industrial supersectors for the state. I mentioned this one already. You do see the expected rise in unemployment, reflected there in the figure, but that's because we expect continued reentry into the labor force. We expect that job openings rate to fall as more people come into the labor force. That's going to be a good thing, and basically that's reflective of the notion that we're going to kind of give back to normal in terms of labor force and in terms of job openings, even though it will carry with it a little bit of an increase in the unemployment rate. It's a good thing because it's not reflective of people losing their jobs. Here's the forecast going forward for each of our counties. The blue bars show you the growth that we've experienced over the last decade. The yellow bars show you the growth that we expect going forward. Jefferson's at the top. Growth is expected to be very rapid, very healthy, very strong in Jefferson. Berkeley comes in third. We do think that for whatever reason, the Winchester MSA is expected to grow a little bit faster, but Berkeley comes in third. Both Jefferson and Berkeley are expected to exceed the nation in terms of job growth over the coming 5 years. Morgan County is expected to grow as well. As a matter of fact, Morgan County is expected to grow more rapidly than what it has over the past decade, but Morgan County is expected to lag the nation just a little bit. And then you see the Hagerstown MSA growth, all of those units, Jefferson, Winchester, Berkeley, US, Morgan, Hagerstown, all of them are expected to exceed the growth that we expect statewide in our state. So again, bottom line is this has been an outlier region for years and years now, and nothing's expected to change. It's expected to continue to be an outlier, expected to exhibit a much higher than normal growth rate for the state, even a higher growth rate than at the very least the Hagerstown MSA, higher growth rate than the nation. Maybe not the Winchester MSA, but you see what we're talking about there. So I'll talk about economic development. This is where my talk kind of goes off the rails a little bit. I hope you agree that it hasn't been off the rails already, but at least assuming that it kind of goes off the rails, because many of the points that I'm going to talk about here are relevant to the state overall. Economic development's really very different here, because what we're doing here is, frankly, easier. We're trying to take momentum that's been very positive and continue and enhance that momentum. But doing that is very, very different than turning decline into growth. And so some of the points I'm going to talk about here are about turning decline into growth. For you all, your economic development strategies need to be things that are more around making sure that we have a good housing stock to continue to attract people to our region, making sure that we have good public infrastructure to make sure that that doesn't become an impediment to continued growth over the next several years, making sure that we have good regulatory and oversight policies, making sure that we still have available plots for new businesses to continue to come into the region. Those are the strategies that we have to pursue here. Strategies that are centered around making sure the growth can continue, making sure that we don't outgrow the infrastructure that we already have. Does that make sense? That's still problems, right? I mean, I'm not saying that everything's perfect. I'm saying, like, if we do find ourselves where there's not enough housing for more people to come in, that is a problem. But that's a much better problem to have than some of the other stuff I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. Anyway, that's the idea. I think your biggest economic development challenge in the state is around human capital. I talked before about how we have the lowest rate of labor force participation in the country, even among prime age workers. And I think we have 3 or 4 big reasons why that is the case. Maybe even more, but at least 3 or 4 big reasons. One is just education. We have a lot of people in West Virginia who don't have the right education or training or job preparedness to work. And because of that, we have a lot of people who just aren't even engaged in the work, not even engaged in the labor force, not even looking for work, because they know they're not going to get hired because they don't have the right education or training. I'm just simply showing you the attainment of a bachelor's degree statistic. I'm not trying to say that a bachelor's degree is for everybody, or a bachelor's degree is certainly not required for every job. I'm just showing this as one illustration. You could pick out other statistics too. Actually, I was down in Charleston a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to one of the delegates, and have any of y'all read about K-12 chronic absenteeism in our state? It's crazy. I don't know. I mean, both my kids are in 9th and 11th grade, and I mean, they don't miss. I mean, my son did miss last week with pink eye, but they don't miss. I mean, but if you talk to some of the people in Charleston about statewide chronic absenteeism for K-12, The statistics will blow your mind. Anyway, this is one of our big challenges. We have a lot of people in the state who just aren't prepared for the workforce. That's hurting our state in many ways. That's one reason why that labor force participation rate is where it is. Another problem is just health. If you look at any of the health statistics, I mean, here you can see that West Virginia comes in the dark red, which is the least favorable category. If you look at overall mortality, you can look at any of the individual mortality statistics, things like cancer, diabetes, obesity, exercise, smoking, or lack of exercise, or smoking. Look at any of those individual health statistics. Across the board, West Virginia comes in somewhere between 45th and 50th among the states. This is another thing that's keeping us behind. We have people who would like to work in a perfect world, but they aren't able to get into the workforce because of some health problem or disability. Of course, West Virginia also ranks high in terms of disability as well. And these statistics, by the way, are already adjusted at the Centers for Disease Control. The statistics are already adjusted for the age distribution. So we rank in the dark red even aside from the fact that we're an older state. The statistics already account for that age issue. And then here's the one that's really kind of off the charts as well. You know, nationally, if you look across the states, if you take the number of people who die from a drug overdose, the number of people who died from a drug overdose in 2021, if you take the average across the states, you'll get about 33. These statistics are measured per 100,000 people. So 33 people per 100,000 died from a drug overdose. That was a state average. As you see, West Virginia comes in at 91, almost 3 times the average across the states. So, you know, this is a tragedy in so many ways, like a human tragedy, but it's an economic development problem as well. You have people who would like to be in the workforce. You have people who would like to be engaged, people who would like to be out there, but they've gotten addicted and they can't get into the workforce because of this addiction. Furthermore, if you're trying to sell West Virginia to potential employers, you get a potential employer who wants to come here. The person starts kind of investigating, looking at the lay of the land in West Virginia. If they find that a bunch of people can't pass a drug test, then that's obviously a major economic development deterrent as well. So it's a human problem, but it's also a real problem for workforce participation and for overall economic development. I don't have a slide for this, but the other issue that's really kind of gotten on my radar lately is lack of access to childcare. I don't know how bad that problem is. Now, you're shaking your head, but you don't live in the Eastern Panhandle. So I was wanting to get somebody, is that a problem here as well? Or is it, Jennifer? Well, I've been in several meetings and I've kind of been involved in a couple of events lately that focus on childcare access. And it really seems to be the case that a lot of people in West Virginia who would like to work just simply can't work because they don't have any childcare option at all, or the childcare option that they do have is just prohibitively expensive. So I think that's kind of a fourth area that deserves attention. I just want to tell you the story about how about what we face in many parts of West Virginia. This is not the case here, and this is kind of why I feel awkward, because this does not apply to Jefferson or Berkeley counties. But the story I want to tell you really explains a lot of what you see in many of our counties. It's this vicious cycle. The story starts with a lack of industrial diversification. We had many counties historically that were dominated by one industry, obviously coal in our example. You want a county economy or a regional economy that has a bunch of industries that are doing well. You want to have a high level of diversification, so if one industry suffers for whatever reason, other industries are still growing and they can fill in that gap. But we didn't have that. We had dominance by one industry for many, many of our counties. If you go to Boone County, for example, you can find a period in time where over 60% of the jobs in Boone County were coal-related jobs. Okay, that is the epitome of not diversified. So you have a shock to that dominant industry. We all know about the shocks that have occurred to coal for various reasons over the last 60 or 70 years. when the shock occurs, not everybody can just wait for a new job to appear magically. So a lot of people have to move away to find jobs elsewhere. I myself am an out-migrant from a coal community, to find work. I mean, there's no jobs in my hometown. Jobs in my hometown are long gone. So I myself am an out-migrant. When the out-migration happens, out-migrants tend to be younger, they tend to be healthier, they tend to be better educated, better prepared for the workforce. That's just what the statistics show. So that makes the area older, less healthy, less educated, or less prepared for the workforce. So the area was having a hard time diversifying and attracting a wide array of industries to begin with. But now after this out-migration happens, the area becomes less attractive to potential businesses. So now it's even harder to diversify than it was to begin with. On top of this, drug abuse. We see a very, very, very high correlation between drug abuse and lack of economic opportunity. Right, there's a lot of reasons why people can get hooked on drugs, but lack of economic opportunity is one of the biggies. Areas less attractive to new potential businesses, and we have this downward spiral or this vicious cycle. That's the story that we see for so much of West Virginia. So there are two ways to help curb this vicious cycle. It's not easy, by the way. By the way, we're not going to be able to curb this vicious cycle in every county in West Virginia in our lifetime. That's the data just don't show that. We can curb the vicious cycle in some areas, but this is a hard problem to fix, and it's not going to be fixed in every county. It's just not realistic. So you have two ways to curb this vicious cycle. One way is to continue to drive growth in areas like the Eastern Panhandle and to have that growth broaden out. You see what I mean? Even if your next door county has been subject to this vicious cycle for some reason, if you have growth somewhere here, that growth will spread out and broaden just geographically over time. For example, in north central West Virginia, where I live, I'm optimistic that our growth and prosperity can broaden out to some of the counties that are south of us over time. And we can help serve to curb that vicious cycle, just growth coming from our center spreading out. The problem with the Eastern Panhandle is just the geography of it all. It's hard for the prosperity here to broaden out because of what we look like on the map. Otherwise, what we're left looking for is some new spark. For many of our counties, we're not in a situation where we're trying to make sure that we don't get in the way of the momentum that we already have. We're not talking about things like making sure that infrastructure is keeping up with growth, making sure that housing is keeping up with growth, making sure that site availability is keeping up with growth. We're not worried about making sure that we are accommodating growth. In many of our counties, we're thinking about a new spark, something outside of the box, something different that can help create momentum and start to turn things around. We have some examples of sparks that have already been drawn to West Virginia. Here's a list of some of the wins that were negotiated with the West Virginia Department of Economic Development over the course of 2022 and 2023. You see there, for example, 3,000 jobs negotiated, created through the Department of Economic Development. One of the best examples is Nucor there, 800 jobs, 800 good-paying jobs. That's an example of something that could create a spark, create positive momentum in an area that's otherwise subject to this decline. There's several examples. There are other examples, other new industries, new ways of operating, new opportunities that can create sparks in other parts of West Virginia. We still have an opportunity for downstream manufacturing associated with natural gas. Again, that's not relevant over here, but what we want to do is not just simply export raw natural gas. We want to take that gas, break it into its various chemical components, which is what that picture is, and use those chemicals in manufacturing processes. Things like extracting rare earth elements is a great opportunity and another potential new spark for maybe other regions of West Virginia. As you know, rare earth elements are very, very high in demand across the country. Every single electronic item uses rare earths. Right now, we rely overwhelmingly on China for rare earths, but we look around, we figure out West Virginia is full of rare earth elements in coal waste, in acid mine drainage. We're working right now on ways to extract those rare earth elements from acid mine drainage in a cost-effective way. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's another potential opportunity. We have more potential opportunities around tourism. Now, who was that who was telling me that the number one county in West Virginia for tourism spend was Jefferson? Yeah, there you go, exactly. We have new opportunities around tourism. We have a lot of area counties in our state that have, fantastic, beautiful outdoor amenities. There's one example of the beauty of West Virginia. This is a strength. This is a competitive advantage that we can leverage to help bring more dollars into West Virginia. We've actually made some gains. We're doing good things in the area of tourism, but there's still so much more that we can do to bring people to our state. Remote work, outdoor recreation, all these are examples of kind of outside of the box, different entrepreneurial ideas that can create a new spark in some of our counties. But again, the growth, what you need to do here is more accommodative in terms of accommodating growth rather than finding a new spark. But that's where we stand. Jennifer, am I going to take questions by myself now, or we going, or we just want to have like whoever's available?
We can open it up for questions. So if someone has a question for John, or if there's an additional question that maybe Jim or someone from Jefferson or I can answer, we are happy to do so.
Okay, so if you have questions, I'll take kind of national or state questions, and Jennifer, Jim, others who are focused more on the local region, who might have more detailed knowledge on specific sites or something like that, can take more locally oriented questions. How about this? I take the easy questions, they take the hard questions. That might be better. Uh-huh. I mean, a lot of the opportunities that we're going to see will hopefully attract migrants. That's kind of what I was saying. I mean, our economic development to a large extent is going to depend on in-migration. Like the new core job, the new core facility with 800 jobs in Mason County, that is going to have to attract in-migration to that county. Some of the in-migration may come from other West Virginia counties. Some of the in-migration may come from, Kentucky or Ohio or wherever, Pennsylvania. But in-migration's definitely a part of the picture because we don't even have enough people to feed all the growth that we would like to see. That's why I really got excited about the in-migration figures or the net migration figures of the last couple of years. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Being able to go from being able to attract a workforce, you have to be able to employ all kinds of people, single dads, single moms, and if one parent has to leave the workforce, then we lose our workforce.
Yeah. No, every time I talk to anybody, it just reinforces my idea about the importance of this child care issue. So thanks for adding that. Any other questions? Uh-huh.
What do you think would be the economic implications in the near term of the tax relief legislation that passed last year?
In our state, I don't have a good answer. I mean, it'll probably help with the in-migration. I don't know if it will turn the tide and make everything, better overnight, but I think it will help. It'll give people more money to spend, which will give a boost. It might encourage more immigrants to come into West Virginia now that their tax policy is a little bit more attractive than it was. I don't expect it to be the silver bullet that will fix all of our woes, but it'll help a little bit. But at the same time, on the spending side, we have to make sure that we continue to invest those tax dollars in things like infrastructure, education, fighting the drug abuse crisis. So, there's a fine line to walk between we want good tax policy, but we also really have to make sure that our infrastructure doesn't lag and our education outcomes don't lag and things like that. But it can definitely give a boost. Anything else? Only easy question so far. Well, thanks so much. I always love coming over here, and thanks for having me. If you ever decide to invite me back, I'll come back anytime.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate you for sharing your wealth of information. We always appreciate you being willing to come to the Eastern Panhandle. And as you mentioned, as you were talking, something came to my mind, something that Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats. So hopefully we in the Eastern Panhandle are helping do that to the entire state. So thank you. And before we close, I want to thank these organizations again for making this happen. The West Virginia Development Office, the Berkeley County Development Authority, the Martinsburg-Berkeley County Chamber of Commerce, the Jefferson County Chamber of Commerce, and the Jefferson County Development Authority. And also, I want to give a huge thank you to the Holiday Inn for a great lunch, and thank you for all attending. But before we do close, I do want to mention that on March the 6th, here at the Holiday Inn, we do have a manufacturers roundtable and supply chain forum from 2 to 4. That is being hosted by the WVU Industrial Extension. So, thank you.